V'zot haTorah asher sa Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. This is the Torah that Moses placed before the people of Israel, God's word through the hands of Moses. This is the Torah. This is the Torah scroll that represents Torah scrolls the worldwide. This is the scroll of faith and hope. We witnessed the Torah scrolls removed from a sanctuary in Kyiv, Ukraine, as the city was under siege. Throughout the generations, our ancestors carried the Torah, our sacred teachings, our way of life, our heritage, from village to village, country to country, across oceans, always believing in tomorrow. The power of one voice, the strength of one scroll. This is the meaning of today, the resistance of one. Our tradition teaches us, Kol Yisrael averim zeh bazeh, all of Israel are responsible for one another. Moreover, whoever saves one life saves the entire world. This Torah scroll is symbolic of all the scrolls of our community. It is the notion that one scroll, one soul, can make a difference. One can change the world. One can save humanity. From one scroll, we embrace hope, faith, and tomorrow. My name is Rabbi Elizabeth Hirsch, and it is my privilege to serve as the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel. Temple Emmanuel is honored to be the virtual venue for this meaningful program. We welcome you as our St. Louis community and families commemorate Yom HaShoah v'Hagivurah. Our Torah scroll will now be passed to our congregation's second-generation children of survivors, to be placed on our bima as an eyewitness to the atrocities of the Holocaust.
My name is Robert Klein-Lehrer. I hold this Torah in honor of my father, Aaron Klein-Lehrer, and in memory of my mother, Helen Klein-Lehrer.
My name is Mona Green. I hold this Torah in honor of my mother, Carol Gullum Pollock, and in memory of my father, Abraham Pollock.
My name is Rena Ben Ruby Abrams, and I hold this Torah in memory of my father, Reuben Ben Ruby, and my mother, Rachel Ben Ruby, in Macedonia, Greece.
My name is Lynn Spiewak, and I hold this Torah in memory of my mother, Ilsa Altman.
My name is Michelle Draben. I hold this Torah in memory of my mother, Marta Midlash, and my father, Henry Draben.
This is one day and one moment in time. We forever carry the names and memories of the 6 million whose lives are a blessing to us and to all humanity. We carry their souls and stories as they never saw their future. We think about the bravery of so many whose names are lost in the wind. We say never again. And I ask, what does this mean to you? How do your actions and words reflect the importance of this? Do you live with meaning and purpose? How is your Jewish life and being reflected when we say never again? What is the importance of Yom HaShoah v'Hagivurah to you? Our Torah scroll, belonging to all Jewish people, is from the tiny town of Treban, Czechoslovakia. Treban was a city with a population of 9,000, founded in the 12th century. The 87 Treban Jewish souls were deported to Theresienstadt concentration camp, and from there to extermination camps. There were no survivors. Miraculously, 3 Torah scrolls, which belonged to the Treban synagogue, survived the war. Through the Jewish community in Westminster and Great Britain, this sacred scroll was on loan to the Kol Am congregation, and now to Temple Emmanuel. Every time we read from this scroll, we hear the voices of generations past and invite the future forward. This scroll teaches us about faith and action. It is about hope. I find strength and guidance from our teaching. This scroll is our light in a darkened world. This scroll that once served the Jewish families of Treban serves as a reminder that Judaism is eternal. On a section toward the end, Deuteronomy, there is a repaired bullet hole and a blood stain. Every time we read from this scroll, it becomes kosher. With each reading from our sacred tradition, we affirm life. When we carry and dance with the scroll on Simchat Torah, we are joined by every Jewish soul who has lived or will live. Our voices join from generations past on the wings of eagles to a vibrant future. Reading from this scroll and all others, we find the strength to say, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. We live in the second generation, the third, and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As long as one of us stands here to pronounce Shema Yisrael, the people of Israel live. In the book of Exodus, we read that God went before our ancestors in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel day and night. Our ancestors were guided by forces they could not touch, yet they had faith to follow the gifts from God. Each generation, in every moment, finds strength in faith. How often do we sense a light, a force greater than ourselves, to bring us to safety, to find that moment or place of hope? This scroll, the scrolls in the Aron HaKodesh, in every sanctuary in this community, are a tangible light of life and hope. These are the lights which guide and sustain us. Throughout our history, even in the face of struggles, our people found prayer in song and dance. In the darkest moments of our lives, we find that faith to reach out to God and allow our faith to be the source of hope. As our ancestors stood at the Sea of Reeds, as each generation stood at its own body of water, it was the first faithful one to step forward before the shores parted. It only takes one faithful soul to have hope in the journey, in ourselves and in our God. There is a time for faith and a time for action. We remember the 6 million of our brothers and sisters mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, and friends who were murdered because they were Jewish. We remember those who resisted evil and terror, degradation, and death. We hold fast to our teachings, to our communities, to our people, and to our faith. V'zot HaTorah, this is the Torah. We are Am Yisrael. We are one.
On this 27th day of April, 2022, we are called to commemorate all who suffered during the Holocaust. We mourn those who lost their lives. We honor those who survive, and we celebrate those who saved others. A cruel and deadly event that brought out the worst and the best in humanity. The Holocaust helps us understand what human beings are capable of doing. Sadly, some 77 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, mass atrocities continue. Darfur, Burma, Cambodia, China, Rwanda, Bosnia, Iraq, Syria, and the list goes on. Currently, the world watches as Russia wages war on Ukraine, and we see the misappropriation of Holocaust history. A Holocaust survivor from Kyiv named Anna recently said after refusing to leave her home, "I survived Hitler. I will survive Putin." Stephen, a Holocaust survivor from Washington, D.C., shared that watching the mothers and children grimly marching out of Ukraine reminds him of his own marches to Auschwitz. Never again has not become a reality. Human beings often fail to recognize the consequences of our actions and non-actions. As important as it is to remember the where and the when of the Holocaust, it is vital to remember the why and the how. It was the actions and non-actions of ordinary people just like you and me that allowed the Holocaust to happen. Yom HaShoah provides us an opportunity for a call to conscience. What would happen if we all paid more attention to our thoughts, words, and actions on a daily basis? Would it be possible to abolish hatred from our vocabulary? Could we be givers of forgiveness? Would we be able to be more empathetic to the suffering of others? Could we see ourselves and our neighbors? When enough of us reach this critical mass in our thinking, change can happen on a larger scale. Maybe we can honor all who suffered during the Holocaust by becoming aware of our daily interactions with others and seeking the common humanity that unites us all. Perhaps then, never again will become more than just a phrase. The Missouri Holocaust Education and Awareness Commission, whose mission is to promote Holocaust education and awareness throughout the state in order to broaden understanding and discourage bigotry, understands that we must continue to learn from the past in order to change the future.
Hello, I'm Brian Hersig, President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, where we are proud to be celebrating our 120th year. Thank you for joining us today. This year, our St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum is grateful to be able to join with you virtually to remember those who perished in the Holocaust, as well as those who survived and continue to inspire us to build a better world. The museum's tagline is, "In honor of the survivors and the memory of the victims." Never does that purpose resonate more strongly than on this day, Yom HaShoah. Each year, we honor the voices of those who survived the Shoah and the memories of those who did not. The Federation is extremely excited about the renovated and expanded St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, which will open later this year. It will be a world-class institution where the voices of the survivors and the victims can be heard and will empower future generations, tasking them with sharing and reframing the lessons of the Holocaust so they are never forgotten. Sadly, we recognize that these lessons are not yet fully learned. Anti-Semitic incidents are on the rise at an alarming rate, and violence directed at ethnic and religious groups has been occurring with disturbing frequency. And amid the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've seen the history and language of the Holocaust twisted in appalling ways. We understand the gravity of what is happening there, and we have not forgotten, which is why, with many of your support, we were able to open a Ukraine Emergency Fund to help the people on the ground to find their way to new homes or their way to Israel. Yom HaShoah calls on all of us to fulfill the duty of tikkun olam, repairing the world, by preserving the memories of those who lived through the Shoah and by listening to the voices and stories of the survivors. We must also work each and every day to ensure that future generations will know what it truly means to say never again. Those who built new lives in St. Louis and survivors everywhere who share their testimonies, however painful, fulfill this role. We must all do our part by listening to their words, internalizing them, and acting on them. As Elie Wiesel wrote, to listen to a witness is to become a witness.
Good evening. My name is Helen Turner, and I'm the Director of Education and Interpretation for the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. We gather together tonight to commemorate Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, the most significant program presented by the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, representing a core tenet of who we are as an educational institute. It is my honor to speak as a representative of the museum on this significant date. 2 years ago, we broke ground on the new museum, and this year, we eagerly anticipate opening its doors. I want to thank Gloria Feldman, her husband Reuben of blessed memory, and the next generation of her family for their continued generous support of the museum. For over 25 years, the Holocaust Museum has organized this annual community-wide Holocaust commemoration, always with the support of Leo and Sara Wolf of blessed memory and the Wolf family. Whether it be at the state capitol, a local place of worship, or virtually, we will continue to gather together to draw inspiration from the lessons of courage, compassion, and resilience of our St. Louis survivors and witnesses. The shofar blasts we heard earlier call us to attention and also call us to action, to listen and heed the voices of survivors and also their descendants. The museum has preserved so many of these voices through the work of Sister Prince and the Oral History Project. Accessible online to students and educators across the state and the world are voices of St. Louis Holocaust survivors. Tonight we will hear some of these voices through readings from the Warsaw Ghetto, rooting us in history of the Holocaust. Then Scott Lenga, son of St. Louis survivor Harry Lenga, will speak about his father's story as told through his book, The Watchmakers, tying us to our St. Louis survivor community. We will light memorial candles and hear readings and prayers. We will also hear from our 4 Shinshinim, young Israelis who defer military service for 1 year and serve as emissaries to Jewish communities abroad. This evening is steeped in ritual and memory, pain and loss, and also faith and healing. It is an honor to be part of this evening and join you in remembering our survivors and their stories, along with the millions of victims for whom so many stories will never be known.
Hello, my name is Michael Kelker. I teach Holocaust literature at St. Charles Community College, and I'm a member of the planning committee of Yom HaShoah. In July of this year, we mark the 80th anniversary of the great deportations of Jews to the death camp Treblinka. Warsaw, the largest of the ghettos administered by Nazi Germany, was home to many of the survivors who came to our community after the war. At its height, the Warsaw Ghetto held over 400,000 Jews in an enclosed area of 1.3 square miles. In October 1939, just a month after the Nazi invasion of Poland and the start of World War II, a remarkable documentation project titled Oneg Shabbat was initiated under the direction of historian Emanuel Ringelblum. Oneg Shabbat, meaning joy of the Sabbath, involved several dozen collaborators working in secret to document all aspects of the lives and the deaths of Jews. 2 troves of documents housed in metal boxes and large milk cans were discovered after the war. This testimony survived the chroniclers, the vast majority of whom, including Ringelblum and his family, were murdered by the Nazis. Ringelblum noted that life in the ghetto changed with cinematic speed. From July through September 1942, some 265,000 Jews were deported to Treblinka, a labor camp 50 miles away, which had been converted in the summer of 1942 into a death camp. Some 925,000 Jews and unnumbered others, including Poles, Roma, and Soviet POWs, were murdered at Treblinka. The following short readings come from eyewitness accounts of life and death in the Warsaw Ghetto. Our readers are Caitlin Corder, Adam Presswood, and Natalie Kelker.
Chaim Kaplan was a Hebrew scholar and educator who perished with his wife at Treblinka. He wrote the following in his diary on April 17, 1942. It is a fact that reality has outdone imagination. Jewish Lublin, a city of sages and authors, a center of Torah piety, was completely and utterly destroyed. An entire community of 40,000 Jews was uprooted and banished. Its institutions, synagogues, and houses of study are gone from the earth. All its wealth has been confiscated, for its sons left it for exile as naked as the day of their birth. When the decree first burst upon them, 40,000 Jews were deported. About 10,000 remained. When the first fury had passed, they were almost certain they had reached a safe haven. They would not be touched again. But once again, Jewish confidence was disappointed.
Emanuel Ringelblum, writing on April 23, 1942. The immortal hole, immortal because they were forever walling it up, and the smugglers were forever breaking it open again, was finally really walled up, and so tight that it can't be broken through. 164 of the German Jews who came to Warsaw a few days ago, the cream of the young people, including a large number of Halutzim preparing to migrate to Palestine, were all sent to Treblinka, where most of them were exterminated in a short time. In 3 weeks, out of 160 Jewish young people from Otvach, only 38 were left.
In hiding in late 1943, after escape from the Warsaw Ghetto, Rachel Auerbach wrote the following about the deportations of Jews as they were heading for Treblinka. The first to be rounded up were the beggars. All the unemployed and the homeless were gathered up off the streets. They were loaded into wagons on the first morning of the deportation and driven through town. They cried bitterly and stretched their hands out or wrung them in despair or covered their faces. The youngest of them cried, "Mother, mother," and indeed there were women to be seen running along both sides of the wagons, head shawls slipping from their heads as they stretched their hands out toward their children, those young smugglers who had been rounded up along the walls.
Emanuel Ringelblum, writing in January 1943. Our aim was that the sequence of events in each town, the experiences of each Jew, and during the current war, each Jew as a world unto himself, should be conveyed as simply and faithfully as possible. Every redundant word, every literary gilding or ornamentation grated upon our ears and provoked our anger. Jewish life in wartime is so full of tragedy that it is unnecessary to embellish it with one superfluous line. Our co-workers wrote the truth. The material of Oneg Shabbat is of great importance for the future tribunal, which, after the war, will bring to justice offenders among the Jews, the Poles, and even the Germans. Harry Lenga was living in Warsaw when the Germans invaded Poland in 1939. Mr. Lenga escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941. We will now hear about his story from his son, Scott Lenga. This is a special story to me because in 1986, the first Holocaust survivor that I ever heard speak was Harry Lenga. Personal testimonies like his of genocide and survival compelled me to study and then to teach Holocaust history and literature. Harry Lenga, who passed away in the year 2000, was one of 3 brothers from Poland who survived the Shoah by using the watchmaking skills that they learned from their father. After the war, Harry built his life and family in St. Louis, where he began speaking about his experiences in the Shoah. His speeches at St. Louis area schools had a powerful impact. His listeners loved him for his warmth and openness. Excerpts from Harry's extensive testimony are prominently featured in our museum exhibits. Scott Lenga grew up here in St. Louis and now lives in Israel, where he built a family and works as an attorney in the high-tech industry. We are very excited about Scott's new book, The Watchmakers, which tells the full story of Harry and his brothers, the life and death risks they took to stay together, and how they fought to survive.
I come to you standing on the shoulders of my dad, Chil Lenga. He and his brother Moshe changed their names to Harry and Morris when they settled in St. Louis after the war. In the 1980s, long before there was a Holocaust museum in St. Louis, my dad was among the first survivors to speak in schools all over Missouri. I am deeply grateful to Sister Vida Prince and Rabbi Robert Sternberg, who interviewed my dad, encouraged him to speak out, and joined him on stage at countless school assemblies. Though I now live in Israel, I grew up in U City and Olivet, a short couple of miles from the site of the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. Many thanks to the museum staff for inviting me to speak at this commemoration of Yom HaShoah. It is a big honor for me to be addressing the St. Louis community. My dad grew up in the 1920s and 30s in a family of watchmakers in Kuznets, a small town in Poland with deep Hasidic roots. Their life before the war was tough. His mother died in childbirth when he was just 4 years old, and his family fell into a cycle of poverty that they could never get out of. He had a tough relationship with his father. My grandfather, Zadie Michoel, who I never met, was strict and impatient with his kids. He was devoted to the Hasidic way of wrestling with his own hardships in life. On many days, when his family literally had nothing to eat and not even enough money to buy a loaf of bread, he would look hunger and poverty in the face and give away his last few coins to someone who walked into his store begging for charity. He told his kids that God would provide. Zadie Michoel thought that he was teaching his children to walk the truth path of spirituality, but it was too much for them. My dad would run outside and cry silently. Zadie Michoel wanted his sons to become Torah scholars and didn't push them to learn the watchmaking trade. But when they came to his watchmaking bench with their own initiative, he was patient and encouraging. He taught them by example the patience and focus required for the precision work. At the time, they didn't know how valuable this watchmaking skill would be for them. And it wasn't until later in the war when my dad finally understood how his father's religious discipline trained him and his brothers to sacrifice for each other and to help others in the most extreme situations. 3 years into the war, on September 26, 1942, at around 6 o'clock in the evening, Zadie Michoel's friend, the captain of the local Polish police, came to tell him that the Germans had planned to round up all the Jews of the town the next morning and to send them away on a train. He told Zadie Michoel that if he loved his sons, he should make sure they escape by 8 p.m. that evening. Here are several interview clips where my dad describes the heart-wrenching scene that followed.
All 3 of us, we left the first day of Sukkot in the evening. We knew that the next day will be for sure the deportation. And of course we asked my father again to go with us, and he didn't. Of course, one thing is it was involved. It was my mother, my stepmother, my father, and her sister stayed with us, and the mother. So My mother said she won't leave her mother. Her sister said she can go away and leave the mother with her sister. My father said I can go away and leave my wife with her mother. And that's how it was. One felt responsible for the other person. But all of them agree that we three should leave. Let's take a chance. Because we didn't know what's going to happen. But he said, let's take a chance. And you know what my father did? Everything, what he had. He took everything together, and he packed everything, and he gave it to us. He knew we are going away to that camp. I says, Dad, you can't give us everything, the tools, and watches, and rings, whatever we had. And he says, I don't need it. You have a chance, you're still young. No matter what will happen to me, we won't be able to use that. But you're young, you might have a use for it. So you take it and keep it. We bought our lives many times because of that.
My father was seeing to that we are leaving. He was very serious about it, We cried. Each of us cried. My father cried. I cried. My brother cried. Marcel and Moshe. My mother cried. We all cried. We walked out. We kissed each other. We ran to each other, embraced, and we kissed each other, and we walked out from the house. My father was praying to God we should make it to the place. We shouldn't be caught by the Germans.
Because that was a big risk too.
Sure, you shouldn't supposed to leave the ghetto. We had to go outside the ghetto. And that was the end of it. In the morning they took all them away and they were finished. They took them to Treblinka.
The next morning, the Lenga brothers stood with my dad's best friend, Chamira Salzberg. Chamira described the scene as follows. Suddenly, there was heard in the camp the whistle of a locomotive. A special train with many cars had carried away our dearest and most beloved on Sunday, September 27, 1942. To this day, the whistle of a train remains for me a nightmare. All were strongly affected by the horrifying news. Many collapsed. Some hours later, my dad's family, along with the 10,000 Kozhenitzer Jews, more than half of the population of the town, arrived in Treblinka, where they were herded into a single gas chamber and murdered with industrial efficiency within a matter of minutes. The watchmaking tools that the three Lenga brothers received from Zedi Michoel were literally tools of survival in the slave labor camps of Gorchitsky, Volanov, and Starchowice. At the same time, those tools were a kind of amulet, a vital emotional connection to their father, a physical link to his tears and prayers. The brothers made a pact to stay together no matter what happened and at any cost. And when those precious tools were taken away from them on the ramp in Auschwitz, along with their clothes, all of their body hair, and even their names, when the numbers A19366, A19367, and A19368 were tattooed on their arms, my dad described their response as follows. We knew that our hair would grow back and that the numbers were tattooed on our arms, not in our minds. But losing our watchmaking tools left us completely naked. Right away, I made a screwdriver by grinding the end of a nail. Then I made a tweezer from the spring in an old pair of earmuffs. I also found a little toothbrush that I could use to clean watch bars. There were so many plundered watches in Auschwitz. The Germans would trade those watches with each other inside the camp. The Block Altister, the foreman in our barrack, was a Polish guy. He also got a hold of broken watches somehow, and we fixed them in his office after work. With those few tools, I could take apart a watch to clean it and put it back together. Of course, I couldn't fix a watch that needed a new part. When that happened, I told him the watch could not be fixed and asked if he would let me have it for the parts. He agreed, and soon we had 4 watches for ourselves in Auschwitz. 4 times they traded a watch to stay together, and 4 times that saved their lives. Watchmaking was like an ark that carried the 3 brothers through the deluge of war and moral chaos. The mechanical watch itself is a powerful symbol of culture, refinement, civilization, a creation of man that strikes the perfect harmony between the force of gravity, the rotation cycle of the earth, and the very human construct of time. By contrast, the Nazi oppressors in the camps were on the vanguard of a systematic descent into moral depravity, a monstrous deconstruction of Western civilization. And here was my dad, this skinny, starving Jew with a nail and an earmuff spring, proving that even here there is still hope, that we can fix a watch, and maybe even what it symbolizes. The Lenga brothers were liberated from the Ebensee concentration camp in Austria on Sunday, May 6, 1945. My dad weighed 75 pounds, and his brother Moshe weighed 70 pounds. Their liberators were U.S. Army tank commanders Bob Persinger and Dick Pamonte. Bob Persinger commanded the Lady Luck tank. My dad never knew their names, but said he would never forget their faces. My dad loved the American GIs. He said, you could feel the freeness in them, all over them, and the way they talked. No fear. That made a big impression on me. I really felt free with them. Little did he know that Bob Persinger lived in Rockford, Illinois after the war, just a few hours up the road from our home in St. Louis. I would like to take a step back and reflect on our current moment in history, when almost all of the survivors have passed from this world, and the responsibility falls to guys like me, the second generation, and my kids, the third generation. We need to ask ourselves, why? Why do we continue to tell individual survivor stories? Why do we continue to tell the larger story of the Holocaust? There are many good answers to these questions. I will offer the following thoughts. Nazi ideology elevated racism and the will to power over human conscience. They made it into a guiding philosophical principle that human conscience itself is a weakness to overcome. It was more than an ideology. It was a type of religion. The Nazis were very explicit in targeting the Jews as a perennial symbol of human conscience in European culture. Jewish guilt, if you will, that had infected Europe with Judeo-Christian values. They defined Jews as a race that needed to be exterminated for Germany to achieve their true destiny as 20th century barbarians of the master race. As Hitler declared in 1933, we are barbarians. We want to be barbarians. It is an honorable title. The Nazis were able to take power in the most technologically advanced country in Europe and take this conscience is weakness principle to a hideous extreme that we now call the Holocaust. We now live in a time of great fear and confusion regarding core values and even facts. The so-called culture wars are only one facet of this problem. Neo-Nazi movements have exploited this fear to increase their visibility. Their views are being normalized in larger populations who are not even true believers in Nazi ideology. It has been said that when the Nazis came to power in Germany, 1/3 supported them, 1/3 opposed, and 1/3 passively waited to see what would happen. These numbers teach us a critical lesson, that evil people with genocidal agendas depend on the passive ones to shrug their shoulders and look the other way. And the fate of a country, and sometimes even the fate of the world, is determined by the passive ones. As second and third generation survivors, we didn't exactly apply for this job, but this is our moment in history, our opportunity to fix something. Our mission in teaching the Holocaust is to stand on the shoulders of the survivors and scream from the rooftops that each individual is important, precious, created equal in the image of God, and that conscience is the core of our humanity. The Holocaust is an example for the Jews and for all of humanity to see what can happen if we allow ourselves to forget this. The consequences can be swift and extreme, unimaginable evil on an unimaginably huge scale. I will close with a wish that I and my fellow second and third generation survivors are able to fulfill this mission with optimism and passion. We can't allow ourselves to lose heart. My dad speaks powerfully to this point.
The only thing is a miracle. We hope for a miracle. That's all. So we used to say we are still alive. A miracle can happen a minute from now, a day, an hour, you understand, a day, a week, a month. And let's hope that keep on going, because maybe it'll happen in our time before we are finished off. You know, sometimes you can talk yourself to something you believe in, to you're up for it, you know. A lot of people are hungry people. And they believed that I'm hungry now, but later I'll find something to eat. He can last longer than the one, you know, don't think that way. Thinks I'm hungry and I won't get any more food. He becomes a pessimist. He dies faster.
You saw it happen?
Yeah, I did see. Yeah, and many times when they gave up, you know, boys gave up. They said it's pointless. Pointless, he says, to destroy more and more and more. Give up, we will never come out alive. You know, he was a pessimist. And that is a terrible sickness, pessimism. You destroy yourself. I know that it's possible. You have to have optimism all the time.
In this context, the renewed and redoubled efforts of the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum to deliver this message to the Jewish community and the larger community of the Midwest gives me hope and strength. Thank you.
In memory of the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, we light 6 memorial candles. Since our community's earliest Yom HaShoah commemorations, the first candle has always been lit by Sara Wolf. Though Sara and her beloved husband Leo have passed away, our Holocaust Museum is the fulfillment of their shared vision. The Wolfs passed their legacy of remembrance on to the next generation. The first candle is being lit by Leslie Wolf and Leo and Sara Wolf's granddaughter, Shelby Wilhelm. The second candle will be lit by Marianne Colin Goldstein. Marianne's family lived in Nuremberg, Germany. Her father was a physician and wanted to leave as soon as Hitler took power in 1933, but her mother did not want to leave her parents. 1 year later, when it became obvious that Jewish doctors would be unable to practice medicine, her parents fled, leaving her with her maternal grandparents for 2 years. Her grandparents were able to bring Marianne to the United States in 1936 and join her parents. Marianne was 8 years old. Marianne is accompanied by her family. The third candle will be lit by Yiva Levchinsky. Yiva was born in Ukraine. When she was 4 months old, her parents moved to Leningrad. Yiva was 9 years old when Nazi Germany invaded Russia on June 22nd of 1941. Her father joined the Soviet army and defended Leningrad the entire war. It was difficult for the rest of the family to get to a train in order to evacuate from the war zone. The bombs were falling on the city. In August 1941, they boarded the last crowded train, an event she never forgot because they were pushed inside the train through a window. From there they traveled by trains, barge, and truck until reaching Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan. After the war, her family went back to Leningrad, where Yiva graduated from high school and college. Her family came to St. Louis in 1992. Yiva is grateful to our Jewish community for all the help they received. She has 2 grandchildren and 2 great-granddaughters. The fourth candle will be lit by Walter Mayer. Wally Mayer was born in Wiesbaden, Germany. His family left Germany in 1936. They spent several months in Belgium while his father attempted to obtain passage to the United States. They arrived in New York City in November of 1937 and moved to St. Louis a few months later. Wally went to Solden High School and in 1944 enlisted in the United States Army. He was sent to the Pacific and served until 1949. For many years, Wally has shared his testimony as a speaker for the Holocaust Museum. Wally is accompanied by his wife, Rosalie Rottenberg. The fifth and sixth candles will be lit by Eva and Fred Aschner. Eva was born in 1934 in Glatz, Germany. At the age of 4, Eva witnessed the horrors of Kristallnacht. She and her parents emigrated to the Philippines, arriving in Manila in 1939. Tragically, Eva's father was killed in Manila, and she and her mother emigrated to the United States. Fred was born in 1930 in Meissen, Germany. In 1938, Fred's family fled to the Netherlands, thinking that they would be safe, not anticipating that Germany would occupy the Netherlands in 1940. In 1943, they were arrested and taken to Westerbork transit camp, and then to Bergen-Belsen, where his father died. On April 10, 1945, Fred and his mother and thousands of prisoners began a hellish journey by train from Bergen-Belsen. After 13 days, they encountered Soviet troops and German guards fled. Fred tried to save his mother by taking her to a nearby farm, but because of her weakened state, she did not survive. In 1949, at the age of 19, he emigrated to the United States to live with an aunt and uncle. Eva's mother and Fred's aunt came from the same town in Germany. They met in St. Louis at a Passover Seder in 1958 and married in 1960. The Talmud teaches us that whoever saves a single life, it is as if one saves the entire world. Yet the number of rescuers who saved the world is shockingly small. Therefore, it is important to recognize the righteous among the nations, who risked or even sacrificed their own lives by rescuing Jewish people. In remembrance of these righteous souls, we lay a rose alongside our memorial candles. This year, Ari Obenson, President and CEO of the International Institute of St. Louis, will place the rose. He is a visionary leader, fulfilling their mission of welcoming immigrants and refugees from around the world, giving them the opportunity to rebuild their lives in St. Louis. This sacred work has never been more important than it is today. While acknowledging the effects of the Holocaust on the Jewish people, we can't be blind to the tragic losses stemming from genocide, war, intolerance, and hatred that preceded the Holocaust and continue until today. We light a seventh candle in remembrance of the victims of violence and indifference.
Hello, my name is Mikhail Palatnik, and I am a senior lecturer of Russian at Washington University. I was born and raised in Ukraine, where my family had lived for generations. My mother was a survivor of the Holodomor, the artificial famine in Ukraine in the 1930s, and she was also a survivor of the Holocaust. And my father fought the Nazi invasion in the Second World War. The senseless and brutal war unleashed by Russia on Ukraine in the 21st century is an attack against freedom and democracy of the entire world. And today we say we all stand with Ukraine. We're all Ukrainians. I'm lighting this candle in the memory of all the men, women, and children who have lost their lives in this war.
I am Sophia Kent, co-chair of the St. Louis Holocaust Survivor and Descendants Group. The flame of remembrance symbolizes the sacred obligation of the second, third, and fourth generation children and grandchildren of survivors to carry on the legacy of Holocaust remembrance. This year, the flame will be lit by Dr. Matt Berman, a grandchild of survivors. Matt is active with the Survivor and Descendants Group and is a member of the Yom HaShoah Committee. Matthew's grandfather, Leo Golger, grew up in Lamaz, Poland, and survived the Lamaz Ghetto Massacre, where 49 of his relatives were murdered. He became a partisan and hid in the woods until the end of the war. Matthew's grandmother, Yulia Farkas Golger, grew up in Glui, Hungary. Her entire family was taken to Auschwitz, where only she and one sister survived. His grandparents met at a camp for displaced persons in Bari, Italy. They married, and Matt's mother, Anita Golger Berman, was born in 1947. They emigrated to the United States in 1950. With Matt today is his wife, Lizzie, and children, Sadie, Chase, and Quinn.
Hello, my name is Noah Kleinler. Today, we commemorate the 6 million men, women, and children who were murdered in the Shoah simply because they were Jewish. My grandfather, Aaron Kleinler, grew up in Łódź, Poland. From a large Jewish family, my grandfather recalled working in the garden with his mother and watching as his siblings assisted in the sewing of various clothing items and materials. Life was difficult. Anti-Semitism was, and is today, a way of life. My family experienced the very hate that led to the murder of 6 million individuals. They lived through the hate that ignited the flame that lit every single home of all who accepted and did not denounce the virulent hate for others that became the norm of society. The people of Łódź were industrious. My grandfather's family worked as seamstresses, gardeners, and other diligent laborers. They worked to survive. My grandfather took an active approach to not only express his Judaism, but also assisting his fellow neighbors when he belonged to the Łódź Jewish Youth Organization. He carried messages for the local Zionist organization, and from a young age, believed in the idea of justice and fighting back as a people. He loved sports. He boxed and played soccer. An avid theater and opera lover, my grandfather would do anything he could to see a performance. He would sell candy outside of the theater so he could simply buy a ticket. He would find jobs that would allow him to see the opera. If that did not work, he would sneak in to witness a performance. When all else failed, he would just sit outside to hear the beauty and elegance of the performance. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939 and established the ghettos, concentration camps, and extermination facilities, they forced every single Jew to leave their home and everything they knew for the horrors that waited for them. A young man by the name of Hans Müller, who knew of my family, attempted to turn my grandfather in to the Nazis. When they arrived at their home, my grandfather escaped through the window. When my family was brought to the ghetto, that same young man shot and murdered my grandfather's pregnant sister. My grandfather lived as a displaced person after fleeing to Russia, where he joined the army and fought until the end of the war. For the next 30 years of his life, he dedicated his life to justice, where he became a Nazi hunter. He pursued Hans Müller and other Nazis in various countries all around the world, including South America and the Middle East. He never found Hans Müller, but worked with other notable hunters in the field, such as Simon Wiesenthal, to ensure that all perpetrators would be brought to justice. We must not forget that those who did the bidding of the Nazis were the ordinary citizens. When the Nazis entered the cities, towns, and villages, they rounded up the Jews with the help of their neighbors and friends. When they would reach the site where the Jews were to be murdered, our ancestors would dig their own pits, the mass graves. Following, the Nazis would, in some cases, hand the gun over to the civilians, and they would say, "Shoot the Jew." When I give presentations to high school classes and university lectures, I always ask the students, "And what do you think would happen if they did not shoot the Jew?" To which they always reply, every time, "The Nazis would kill them too." No, they would hand the gun over to the next person. We must not be afraid to do what is right. The largest threat to our world is apathy, and one person can make a difference. Today, we celebrate heroism as well. We celebrate those who risk their life for another, the most honorable thing one can do in life. Most importantly, this is for the ongoing fight against injustice and all forms of xenophobia, racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and so much more. Remember that we all play a role in maintaining a society where we all are accepted and able to live freely without discrimination. One person does have the power to make a change, and you do have the ability to change the world. The Holocaust was not long ago and not far away. Never be afraid to stand up for what is right. My grandfather, Aaron Kleinler, turns 100 next month, the day of my high school graduation. I stand here before the community in memory of all his family members, proud of his legacy that we as a Jewish people all share. Additionally, may we pray for peace in the Ukraine. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore.
Shalom to all. My name is Roy Mast. I'm one of the Shinshinim, the Israeli emissaries. I would like to share the story of my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor. My grandfather, Poli, passed away last year in Israel. An only child, he was born in Bucharest, Romania, and was 4 years old when the war started. He, along with his mother, aunt, and grandmother, were hidden by Christian Romanians who were friends of the family. My grandfather and his family hid in the family's farm's underground space with no windows or sunlight. They hid there for 4 years. His father was sent to a forced labor job in Romania, and my grandfather barely saw him. When the war ended, he stayed in Romania for a few more years and suffered from anti-Semitism towards him during kindergarten and elementary school. He and his family moved to Israel in the year of 1950 and settled there. For him, it was a dream that came true. He said that Israel felt like a home from the very first moment. He married my grandma, and they built a family with 4 kids and 11 grandchildren. We as Israelis are the next following generation to the Holocaust survivors, and this is our duty to tell their story and thank them for being so strong and brave, because they are one of the main reasons Israel exists these days. The Jewish nation would not exist either without the bravery of the Holocaust survivors. Being here in St. Louis, educating and connecting people in the Jewish community to my country, Israel, is very meaningful, especially being the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. It feels like a triumph. It feels that way because I get to connect and unite with Jewish people from different place, culture, and language, while the thing that connects us the most is us being Jewish.
Hello, my name is Maya Shapira, and I'm also one of the Shinshanim. I would like to read you a poem called The Butterfly, which was written in 1942 by Pavel Friedman. The text of The Butterfly was discovered at Terezin after the concentration camp was liberated. The butterfly. The last, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzlingly yellow. Perhaps if the sun steers would sing against the white stone. Such a yellow, is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 weeks I've lived in here, penned up inside this ghetto. But I have found what I love in here. The dandelions call to me, and the white chestnut branches in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly. Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto.
Dan Brodsky, cantorial soloist, will now chant El Malei Rachamim.
אל מלא רחמים שוכן במרומים המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים לנשמות כל גיבורי עמנו שמסרו נפשם על גאולת ארצנו אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירם בצאתל כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. To the souls of our brethren who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burnt to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of tzedakah and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. And now, Harvey and Michael Wolf will lead us in the recitation of the Mourner's Kaddish.
Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei rabbah, v'alma divra chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon uvyomechon, uv'chayei dekol beis Yisrael, v'agala uvizman karim v'imaru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah min barach, le'olam ulamei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpahar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yithalel v'yithalal shemei dekudashah b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'sharata tushbechata v'nechemata da amiran v'alma v'yimaru amen. Yehei shleimo rabba min shomaya L'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. Oseh shalom bin Ramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen.
As we conclude our annual Yom HaShoah v'Hagivurah commemoration, we must ask where we are today and where will we go tomorrow. The late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel asked a rabbinical student, "How can you become a rabbi if you don't see the human beings around you?" Open your eyes, my community. What do you see? Elie Wiesel taught never again. He also said the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. We are commanded to live our lives in honor of those who were murdered. We are commanded to live our lives in honor of the sanctity of life because we are Jewish. When we speak and act out against hatred and apathy, we are honoring their memories. One voice, one action can save the world. Elie Wiesel spoke out against injustices in the world. As a survivor of Auschwitz, he knew the horrific terror that humanity was capable of. And as a survivor, he knew the kindness, compassion, and justice humans are capable of. I am asking you today to open your hearts to the cries of others. Open your hands to assist another human soul who cannot help oneself. Use your words for beauty and not destruction. Honor our people, our heroes, our history, with whom you are and can become. My late rabbi, Samuel Poreth of blessed memory, would ask each of us to rise for the Kaddish and say Kaddish for a soul who left no one to say Kaddish for them. Today, we are each a Kaddish. We spoke the ancient words, or said Amen, which brings comfort to one another. As tradition teaches us, this allows the souls to rest in peace. Go to peace. We now conclude with the partisan song, Hatikva, and our national anthem.
Shalom, my name is Shelly Odovic, and I'm one of the Shinshinim here in St. Louis. The partisan song is a Yiddish song with lyrics written by Hirsch Glick, a prisoner in the Vilna ghetto. He wrote this song in 1933, inspired by the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. The partisan song became a symbol of resisting during the Holocaust, and is still considered to be one of the chief anthems of Holocaust survivors. It is sung in memorial services around the world. I think that the song is very important because it represents how strong and brave the partisans were, and how they never lost hope. Daniel Brodsky will now sing the partisan song.
Sag nit kein Mal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, von Himmeln bleiene, verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Shoah, Sveta peugt an unser Trott, wir sehnen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Shoah, Sveta peugt an unser Trott, wir sehnen da. You must not say that you now walk the final way, because the darkened heavens hide the blue of day. The time we've longed for will at last draw near, and our steps as drums will sound that we are here. The time we've longed for will at last draw near, and our steps as drums will sound that we are here.
Shalom, my name is Eshel Ben-Dor, and I'm one of the Shinshinim here in St. Louis. I would like to introduce the Israeli Scouts who are going to sing Hatikva, the Israeli anthem. Hatikva is a short part of a longer song written by Naftali Heretz Imber in 1878. It has always been recognized as the anthem of the Jewish people, but became the official Israeli anthem only in 2004. The anthem has great meaning for Israelis and Jews in general, as it symbolizes the importance for hope for freedom as a Jewish nation in Israel. The Israeli Scouts and the Shinshinim will now sing Hatikva.
Kol od balev Yerushalayim.
These things never end. The